There's an ancient form of power hiding in plain sight, a strategy so counterintuitive that most never recognize its existence, let alone its effectiveness. While the ambitious climb visible ladders of success, drawing attention and resistance, the truly strategic often take a different approach. They deliberately appear less competent, less intelligent, less threatening than they actually are. This isn't about modesty or humility. It's about something far more calculated. The strategic power of playing dumb gives its practitioners advantages that often surpass those gained through demonstrations of brilliance or force. Throughout history, many of the most effective operators in politics, business, and warfare have understood a fundamental truth. People don't fear or block what they believe is useless. Niccolò Machiavelli, the 16th century political philosopher whose name has become synonymous with cunning strategy, recognized this dynamic centuries ago. While his work is often reduced to the pursuit of naked power through any means necessary, his actual insights were far more subtle. Among his most potent observations was the strategic advantage that comes from being underestimated. This isn't just ancient wisdom. Modern psychological research confirms what Machiavelli and other strategic thinkers intuited. Humans consistently overvalue visible competence and underestimate those who appear ineffective. This cognitive bias creates an exploitable gap, a space where those willing to temporarily sacrifice ego for advantage can operate with remarkable freedom. The implications extend far beyond politics into everyday life. In corporate environments, personal relationships, and social dynamics, the strategic use of perceived incompetence creates opportunities hidden from those who feel compelled to constantly prove their worth. But this approach exists in ethical gray areas, carrying both potential and peril for those who employ it. The hidden genius of playing dumb. History reveals a pattern that contradicts our intuitive understanding of power. Many of the most effective rulers, strategists, and operators weren't those who showcased their brilliance, but those who strategically concealed it. Emperor Claudius of Rome provides perhaps the most dramatic historical example. Born with physical disabilities that affected his speech and movement, Claudius was dismissed by his family as mentally deficient. Rather than fight this perception, he leaned into it, playing the fool during the dangerous reigns of Caligula and Tiberius. While more visible threats were eliminated, Claudius survived, eventually becoming emperor himself. Once in power, he revealed himself as a capable ruler and skilled administrator who had been meticulously studying governance, while others dismissed him as irrelevant. The Chinese sage Zhuge Liang employed similar tactics. Before becoming the chief strategist of the Shu Han state during China's Three Kingdoms period, he lived as an apparent eccentric, known locally as Sleeping Dragon. Appearing to be nothing more than a quirky hermit interested in agriculture, he avoided attention while developing the strategic brilliance that would later make him legendary. By the time powerful leaders sought his counsel, he had spent years observing political dynamics without the constraints faced by those visibly pursuing power. This pattern repeats across cultures and time periods. Abraham Lincoln was chronically underestimated due to his humble origins and folksy demeanor, which he strategically emphasized. Japanese industrialist Konosuke Matsushita would often ask stupid questions in meetings, drawing out information others would withhold from someone they perceived as more threatening. Even Warren Buffett, with his deliberate Midwestern simplicity and avoidance of complex financial jargon, benefits from being underestimated despite his status as one of history's greatest investors. Machiavelli himself practiced what he preached. After falling from political grace in Florence, He appeared to accept his humble new status while writing the political analyses that would eventually make him immortal. His seeming acceptance of defeat gave him the space to develop ideas that might have been suppressed had they been recognized as threatening to the powers of his time. What unites these examples isn't just strategic deception, but a profound understanding of human psychology. They recognized that visible power attracts visible resistance, while perceived incompetence creates operational freedom. In Machiavelli's world, appearing harmless while harboring capability was far more effective than projecting strength that inevitably creates opposition. The useless mask that gives you power. The psychological foundations of this strategy run deeper than simple deception. They tap into fundamental biases in how humans assess and respond to others. First is what psychologists now call competence attribution bias, our tendency to make quick, often irreversible judgments about others' abilities based on limited information. Once we categorize someone as incompetent, we interpret their subsequent actions through this lens, discounting evidence that might contradict our initial assessment. This cognitive shortcut creates a persistent blind spot that the strategic player can exploit. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, Machiavelli observed, because it belongs to everybody to see, to few to feel. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This insight reveals why the strategy works. People trust their initial visual assessment over deeper investigation, making the deliberately adopted mask of incompetence surprisingly durable. Second is what modern research calls threat prioritization, our tendency to focus attention and defensive resources on the most visible threats while giving less attention to seemingly harmless elements in our environment. This isn't mere carelessness, but an evolutionary efficiency. Focusing defensive energy on evident threats conserves resources, but creates vulnerability to dangers disguised as harmlessness. Machiavelli understood this dynamic. The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. Insecure leaders surround themselves with visible incompetence to appear superior by comparison. This creates an environment where actual competence disguised as incompetence can operate undetected. Third is informational asymmetry advantage. When others believe you're less capable, they reveal information they would withhold from those they perceive as threats or competitors. This creates a one-way flow of information that accumulates over time. The person playing dumb gathers data while revealing little, gradually building an informational advantage that can be leveraged at the optimal moment. The psychological power of this approach stems from its counterintuitive nature. In a world where most strive to demonstrate competence, deliberately appearing less capable creates a pattern break that few are equipped to recognize or counter. This cognitive blind spot exists because it contradicts our assumed understanding of human motivation, that everyone wants to appear smart, capable, and effective. Why the weak are left alone. Beyond psychological advantages, strategic incompetence leverages fundamental aspects of power dynamics and resource allocation. The fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing, wrote ancient Greek poet Archilochus in a fragment that philosopher Isaiah Berlin later made famous. This distinction reveals a key aspect of the strategy. Those who visibly demonstrate specialized knowledge, the hedgehog, become typecast and targeted. Those who appear to know little but secretly gather diverse knowledge, the fox, maintain freedom of movement across domains. This dynamic applies directly to organizational politics. In corporate environments, visible expertise in a valuable area creates both opportunity and danger. You become essential, but also threatening to established interests. You're assigned critical tasks, but also become a target for those who feel threatened by your rise. Your successes attract attention and create expectations that limit future options. By contrast, the strategically incompetent person avoids both targeting and excessive expectations. They're assigned fewer critical tasks, giving them more control over their time and focuses. They face less scrutiny, allowing space for learning and experimentation. Most importantly, their occasional successes are met with surprise rather than expectation, creating a positive reputation asymmetry that builds over time. Machiavelli recognized this when he wrote, "A prince ought to have no other aim or thought, nor select anything else for his study than war and its rules and discipline, for this is the sole art that belongs to him who rules." Yet he immediately advises that this study should often be concealed behind other activities and interests. The principle applies beyond warfare. The strategic player studies power while appearing engaged in less threatening pursuits. This approach creates what game theorists call a non-zero-sum advantage. In competitive environments, visible high performers enter zero-sum competitions where their gain is seen as others' loss. The apparently average performer operates in a different game entirely, accumulating advantages without triggering the defensive responses that create zero-sum dynamics. How Machiavelli outsmarted the strong. Machiavelli's writings contain numerous passages that directly or indirectly support the strategy of playing dumb, though he rarely states it as explicitly as other tactics. In The Prince, he writes, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." This observation underlies the entire strategy. The gap between appearance and reality creates the space where advantage accumulates. By controlling appearance while developing reality separately, the Machiavellian operator creates a strategic reserve unknown to others. More directly relevant is his advice on displaying intelligence. A prince ought to show himself a lover of talent, giving employment to able men and honoring those who excel in a particular field. Note that the prince should show himself as recognizing talent in others, not necessarily displaying it personally. The implicit message, "Let others shine visibly while maintaining your own assessment capabilities." Machiavelli further advises, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Yet he immediately qualifies this famous statement by warning against being hated, which emerges from being seen as threatening. The strategically incompetent person avoids both excessive fear, which creates resistance, and hatred, which creates active opposition, operating instead in the gray area of minimal threat assessment. Perhaps most revealing is Machiavelli's personal experience. After falling from power in Florence, he accepted a humble life while privately developing his political theories. He appeared resigned to his fate while creating works that would eventually give him more lasting influence than any political office could have provided. His apparent acceptance of diminished status created the space for his greatest achievements. This pattern appears in his advice on managing good fortune. "Fortune is the arbiter of half our actions, but she still leaves the other half, or perhaps a little less, to be governed by us." The strategic use of perceived incompetence acknowledges the role of fortune, how others perceive and position you, while maximizing the portion you directly control, your actual capabilities and their concealed development. Weaponize invisibility. The practical applications of strategic incompetence extend far beyond historical examples into modern contexts. In corporate environments, the the strategy creates several advantages. First is the avoidance of what management researchers call the responsibility-authority gap. High performers are often given increased responsibility without corresponding authority, creating unsustainable pressure. The seemingly average performer avoids this trap, receiving responsibilities more aligned with their apparent capabilities. Second is protection from the tall poppy syndrome, the human tendency to cut down those who visibly rise above others. By avoiding prominence while building capability, the strategic player avoids becoming a target for colleagues' competitive instincts or supervisors' insecurities. This doesn't mean avoiding all achievement, but rather ensuring achievements appear fortunate or situational rather than threatening. Third is informational advantage. When others perceive you as less competent, they speak more freely around you, revealing information, concerns, and intentions they would conceal from someone they view as a competitor. Over time, this creates substantial asymmetric knowledge that can be deployed at optimal moments. In negotiation contexts, appearing less informed or capable often elicits better terms. The other party, believing they hold an advantage, may offer concessions they would withhold from someone they perceived as equally capable. Car dealers are familiar with this dynamic, which is why some sophisticated buyers deliberately present as uninformed about automobile pricing and features. In leadership scenarios, strategic incompetence in specific areas creates space for others to develop capabilities and confidence. The leader who occasionally doesn't understand a technical issue forces team members to develop and articulate their own solutions, rather than becoming dependent on the leader's expertise. This develops organizational capacity while preserving the leader's energy for truly critical matters. Even in personal relationships, selective incompetence creates freedom from expectations that might otherwise become burdensome. The partner who can't quite figure out how to properly load the dishwasher eventually stops receiving that assignment. While manipulative in some contexts, this can also represent a rational division of labor based on genuine preference rather than capability. The dark psychology warning. Despite its effectiveness, the strategy of playing dumb carries significant risks and ethical considerations. The most immediate danger is discovery. When others realize you've been deliberately appearing less capable than you are, the reaction typically combines anger at the deception and fear about what else you might be concealing. This can destroy trust permanently, creating enemies more determined than those you might have made through open competence. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands, Machiavelli wrote, for everyone can see but few can feel. But those who do feel, who directly experience your deception, often become permanent adversaries. This risk increases with the strategy's success. The greater the gap between perceived and actual capability, the greater the sense of betrayal when it's discovered. A second risk is the psychological toll of sustained incongruence between public persona and private reality. Maintaining a false presentation of self requires constant vigilance and performance, creating what psychologists call cognitive load that depletes mental resources over time. The energy devoted to maintaining the deception becomes unavailable for other purposes, potentially negating some of the strategy's advantages. There's also the risk of internalization. Humans have a tendency to become what they consistently pretend to be. The executive who plays dumb in meetings may eventually lose the habit of sharp thinking. The strategist who conceals insights may gradually stop generating them. What begins as tactical deception can unintentionally become reality through the power of habit and identity formation. Ethically, The strategy raises serious questions about authenticity, honesty, and manipulation. While strategic presentation of self exists on a spectrum from reasonable privacy to malicious deception, deliberately creating false impressions of incompetence approaches the manipulative end of this spectrum. This doesn't make it automatically wrong in all contexts, but it does require careful consideration of intentions, impacts, and alternatives. The most sustainable application of the strategy isn't total deception, but strategic understatement. Rather than actively pretending incompetence, which requires constant performance, the ethical practitioner simply avoids unnecessary displays of capability. They let their work speak for itself when necessary, but don't seek recognition or status beyond what serves their true objectives. The strange paradox of power. The strategy of playing dumb reveals a profound paradox about power and capability. In many contexts, the direct pursuit of power through demonstrated excellence creates resistance that ultimately limits that power. By contrast, the concealment of capability often creates conditions where power can grow unfettered. This counterintuitive dynamic challenges our conventional understanding of success and advancement. We're taught that recognition follows demonstration. Show your capabilities, and the world will reward you accordingly. The strategic approach inverts this. Constrain demonstration to avoid triggering the limiting responses that naturally follow recognition. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, wrote Machiavelli. This gap between appearance and reality creates the space where strategic advantage accumulates. By controlling what others see while developing what you actually are, you create options unavailable to those who feel compelled to constantly prove their worth. The approach requires sacrifice. You must temporarily subordinate ego gratification and external validation to long-term effectiveness. You must accept being underestimated, perhaps even disrespected, while maintaining internal confidence in your developing capabilities. You must focus on effectiveness rather than recognition, substance rather than appearance. But for those willing to make these trade-offs, the strategy offers extraordinary advantages. You gain freedom of movement while others are constrained by expectations. You gather information while others guard themselves against you. You develop capabilities at your own pace rather than being pushed into premature demonstrations of inadequate skill. You choose your moments of revelation rather than being forced to perform on others' timelines. The most sophisticated practitioners of this approach understand that it isn't about permanent deception, but strategic timing. They don't play dumb forever, but selectively, creating space for development and positioning before revealing capabilities when impact can be maximized. They recognize that power often expresses itself most effectively not through constant demonstration, but through careful orchestration of when and how capability becomes visible. This tension between being and appearing cuts to the heart of strategic effectiveness, not just in Machiavelli's world, but in our own. Those who master it gain access to a dimension of power hidden from those who can only imagine direct paths to achievement. They understand that sometimes the strangest power comes not from showing strength, but from strategically playing dumb. But there's a deeper level to this strategy that even Machiavelli only hinted at. A dimension where playing dumb transcends mere tactical advantage to reveal fundamental truths about human perception, status games, and the nature of power itself.